Hi, this is Bob, and for today's 10-minute tour, I'm hopeful we'll get through the rest of the accounts payable vendor setup screen. So we'll get into that right now. And I'm going to jump ahead a couple so I get a live one. Come down in the lower section. One thing I did want to review was the miscellaneous deduction percents. I did kind of, in my head anyway, came up with a possible usage for those, although I don't really think it happens very much in construction. But some companies, you may be able to go in and buy stuff at both retail and wholesale. And retail, they may have like a catalog of stuff, and they may say as a wholesale customer, you get to deduct 15% from the retail prices, but everything's billed at retail. And then if you're over a certain volume, you might get to deduct another 10%. And so that might be uses for those two fields. So when you put on an invoice for that vendor, you're putting it in at retail and backing out those discounts off of retail. So that's about the only use I could come up with for it. All right, on to payment settings. So in here, you have how the stub looks on a check that's going out. And so the most common one is probably this list all invoices on stub. So you're paying 20 invoices, you'd get an invoice with 20, or a check with a stub with all 20 invoices listed there, and the check would be totaled for the total of those 20 invoices. The second choice, summarize on stub, would just sort of take your 20 invoices, total them up, and say payment on account or something along that line. As a matter of fact, I'll check to make sure if it does give some special wording. One item is the system prints a one-line summarized description of the total amount being paid on the stub. So that way you're always going to get one check, because it's never going to, if you paid 50 invoices, it couldn't fit all those 50 invoices on the stub. In this case, it would just summarize it. And conditional looks at the number of spaces you have, and if it's long enough, if the stub is long enough to list them all on, it'll list them all there. If it's not long enough to list them all on, it will report a summary total, and then it will print a detail page as part of your journal, and you can add that journal page to the check to send to the vendor. And then the final one is one invoice per payment. And if you remember earlier, I was talking about Fastenal in one of the earlier recordings. In theory, the trouble is they all have different addresses, but in theory we could do it through this by just making the check payable to Fastenal, pay one invoice per check, and then sort through those and mail the different checks to the different locations using stickers or something. But normally you're not going to have to do one invoice per payment, but some places may require it. Say you're taking checks to go register a bunch of vehicles. They may require you to have a separate check for each vehicle registration. So that's what that is for. Electronic payment settings are if you're going to pay somebody through ACH payment. You need their bank routing number and their account number, whether it's a checking account or savings account. The first time through, you usually do as a pre-note. That makes it, tests it to make sure that the payment goes through clean, and then you put in a pre-note date, and that, well, I guess the system maintains that pre-note date and lets you know that it worked. 1099 settings. Okay, most of this, all the grayed out stuff anyway, is system maintained, but there's a few things that you can do in here that's different. So you can mark a vendor receives a 1099 form if that vendor gets one. The trouble we've had with this is you don't know if it's not checked, whether they don't get one or you just haven't remembered to check the box. So our rule in our company is you always put a reason here as to why that isn't checked. And if there's no reason here and it's not checked, we assume we've got to go back and do some digging on it. So a checkbox means they're going to get a 1099 form and you need to get their ID number and name. And a non-check here means you don't have it done unless you've got a reason here. So we put supplier or incorporated or, you know, I can't think of the other reasons we put in there, but any number of descriptions of why they wouldn't get a 1099. Second TIN notice means you've been notified by the IRS after filing these guys for 1099 2 years in a row that the TIN number's wrong and you can't seem to get them to correct it. Gross proceeds paid to an attorney. If you've got an attorney that you're paying money to, sometimes that includes claim dollars. You check that box. Email. So if a vendor wants an electronic 1099 as opposed to getting a printed one, you can check that box and then put their email address in there. And it will, depending on what you're using for processing, it will send them an email version of it rather than a printed one that you have to mail. Gross revenue. Now the funky thing for this is if I click here and go to that, it says gross revenue. This field is maintained solely by the user and exists for reporting purposes only. The system will not update, adjust, or change the value in this field. I don't really understand what it's good for. I don't think it's the proceeds that they got up here. Like if you settled a claim with an attorney and you sent them $1 million to pay to their client, I don't think that's what goes here. It doesn't say that anyway. Each vendor can only have one type of 1099. So if you've got a vendor who you rent a building from and they're also a subcontractor of yours, you need to do 2 separate vendors and 2 separate 1099s. These amounts are tracked. You close the 1099 year as part of a task in accounts payable that you can do. It also tracks these miscellaneous deduction 2 amount. Now why it doesn't track 1, I don't know. There again, if I click on this and go to it, miscellaneous deduction 2 amount deducted. In the 3 columns displays the accumulated miscellaneous deductions 2 amount deducted for the current miscellaneous deductions 2 year for this vendor. In the 3 columns displays the accumulated tax amounts paid or deducted for this vendor. So I guess it's showing tax, but why it says miscellaneous deductions 2, I don't know. And it says if it's for a summary vendor, it's the total of all the vendors, so you can't really use it. But the whole purpose of a summary vendor is that you don't have to track them for 1099 purposes. The next one's for Canada. I'm not going to bother with that. This keeps track of current balances like open invoices, discounts, retainage, open payments by credit card. I'll go to that real quickly. We don't use this yet, but this box displays the accumulated payments made by all credit cards associated with this vendor. The amount increases when you make entries in tasks, record payments by credit card. The amount decreases when you create a statement invoice in the task, verify statement balance, and when you void the payment by credit card in task, void payments. So there's more details there if you want to dig into it. These are maintained by the system. Keeps track of your last invoice, the number, the date, the amount, the last check, what bank it was paid by, the check number, the date, and the amount. These totals track amount purchased, discounts offered, discounts taken, discounts lost, miscellaneous deductions, and amount paid. And even though I didn't want to. I'm going to have to come back and do one more recording to go through insurance compliance and custom fields. So that's it for today's 10-minute tour. I'll catch you next time. Bye now.